Welcome to the world of Telly.
Hi, I'm Neil,
And I'm John.
and you're listening to World of Telly, the podcast where John and I watch every single TV programme ever made in no particular order. And what are we watching this week, John?
The Mad Death.
Now, for anyone unfamiliar with The Mad Death, it's a 3-part drama about a fictionalised rabies outbreak in Scotland. It was broadcast on primetime BBC One on Saturday nights in the summer of 1983, and it stars Richard Heffer, Barbara Kellerman, Ed Bishop and Basil Brush. It was written by Sean Hignett, directed by Robert Young and produced by Robert McIntosh. Now, before we talk about the programme itself, John, let's talk about rabies.
Yes. Okay, here's your guide to rabies. Rabies is a viral disease. It's surprisingly, in the context of this, not that common in Europe, maybe towards some parts of Eastern Europe. But at the time this program was made and just before, it was on everybody's mind. It was prevalent at one point in sort of early Victorian times, early 19th century. It tended to be described as hydrophobia. Human victims of rabies get a terrible fear of water. It's often known as the Mad Death, hence the title of the program, because of the fact that people get delusions, they get delirium.
Don't the French call it la rage?
La rage. Yes. Oh, la rage. Make even rabies sound great, don't they? The phrase. But it's
a horrible way to die.
It's a horrible way to die. And this is still the case, that when you develop symptoms, you're almost certain to die. There is still no cure of it. And that is a terrifying thing. And sadly, as recently as a couple of months ago, someone died in Britain of rabies after being scratched by a puppy somewhere abroad. And it can take up to a year to develop symptoms. But you can now get immunised. And I think as a part of our public service on this podcast is for years, because of public information films, which we'll get onto later, if you were bitten by a suspected rabid animal, then you went through a series of quite painful injections into the belly, which is supposed to be deeply uncomfortable. And that kind of fed into the horror of it, because even if you're being immunised against it after being bitten, it's still really horrible. But actually that is not the case and hasn't been for many years. It's an injection in the arm. It's just like any other immunisation with potential minor side effects. And as I was saying, it was in the UK in the 19th century, and then it was successfully eliminated in the early 20th century. And that was the case for many, many years. And then it all started to ramp up again in the late 60s. There was an incident when I think it was someone who was on national service somewhere in Europe came in to Britain with a puppy. The classic story, came in with a puppy and the puppy had rabies and it caused a massive scare. It was followed rapidly by another incident. And so in 1969, there was a full-on rabies scare in the UK. No human contracted it, but it led to something very uncannily similar to what we see in the Mad Death. There was, in a particular area, a wholesale slaughter of all animals in a certain circumference.
Including pets?
I don't think it was wild animals. It was wild animals, but it was anything...
Oh, screw them.
Yeah, it was anything other than songbirds and deer.
How did they get away with it?
I don't know how deer got away with it. I think songbirds get away with it because they don't feed on carrion.
Right.
It was all over the front page of the newspaper with this kind of cull with any random person who got a shotgun in the area going around just blasting everything. And this led to something called the Waterhouse Committee, who produced a report on what should happen in terms of stopping animal smuggling into the country and bringing in a longer quarantine period of 6 months, I think it was, for animals being brought in from the continent. That was a start again of the real hysteria about rabies. And there's a weirdly political aspect to it because of the fact that the perceived danger was from Europe. And obviously there are quite a lot of echoes about this now. Constantly the talk of keeping out the animals was sort of like talking about keeping out Europe. And so it was often used as an argument about joining the common market, which in 1969 was fairly imminent. The Channel Tunnel was constantly talked about, or the Channel as it was often referred to, and there was a kind of obsession that wild foxes would sprint their way down the tunnel and careen in. Bats would go flying, swooping down and bringing rabies in. So it reached a real pitched to the point where, and this is the interesting bit, I think, is that TV programs that featured rabies, because it was so in the kind of air at the time, actually often were either approved of by the government or actually helped by the government. When you look at the programs, and I include the Mad Death in this, there's a strong element of drama mixed with long public information film.
Yeah, I just want to say before we go any further that this is actually going to be a World of Telly Rabies special. And we're not just going to be talking about the Mad Death, we're actually going to be talking about a number of different programs. And one of the earliest televisual depictions of rabies is in an episode of Doomwatch.
Absolutely. It's called The Inquest.
Written by Robert Holmes.
Written by Robert Holmes, famous for some series.
Something or other.
Yeah, that he was script editor of, I think. It basically is about a village where there's been an incident of rabies, and there's also an experimental science establishment there doing things with tsetse flies. And a dog-loving woman of the village believes that rabies has actually been brought in by tsetse flies and is nothing to do with the dogs. It's quite a kind of typical Doomwatch, really, in some ways. It's a lot of exposition about the science background, which is quite undigested. It's set in a pub meeting room where the inquest is being held. The guy who's running it is very stern, but it's actually one of the most shambolic inquests because everybody in the village, including the landlord, just keeps chipping in. But I mean, what you find out in the end is that it's a classic. There are faults on both sides. The guy who's running the scientific establishment has been buying in dodgy dogs from somewhere, and
to experiment on.
Yeah, but also the woman who's been taking in strays is also at fault for this.
But the flies have nothing to do with it.
The tsetse flies are innocent. They literally nothing to do with it.
That would be terrifying, though, wouldn't it? If flies could transmit rabies.
Yeah, that would be terrifying. At the beginning, one of the Doomwatch crew, a particularly uninspiring one, the one who sort of replaced Robert Powell, gets shot, which is a great opening episode. They're just taking pot shots at Doomwatch members, which, you know, I sometimes feel the same way with some of the Doomwatch guys. But that was the program, The Inquest, that the Waterhouse Committee I mentioned earlier. The committee literally said in their sort of correspondence that they welcomed the fact that the public had been, as they put it, primed for the finding of the report by an episode of Doomwatch. Because the Doomwatch kind of solution is that the only way to really stop this and be sure of not letting it spread is to shoot all the animals in the area.
Including the pets.
Including the pets. So it's very, very close to being sort of the government line. And that, as I say, sort of continues in the history of these programs and rabies.
In your opinion, what is the most likely cause of rabies in a case such as this?
A dog, and most probably one that's been smuggled into this country.
I see.
The difficulty in this case, which makes it so potentially dangerous, is that no chain of contact has been established.
I see. But as a scientist, Mr. Bradley, how would you answer that problem?
Well, the only answer is to eliminate the danger. Every dog within a radius of 5 miles is a hazard and should be destroyed.
And this is followed by government-made public information films, which were terrifying.
That was part of something very specific. That was in 1975. There was this kind of real fear of fox rabies spreading out from, I think it was Poland, across the continent. And it coincided with the government deciding that something had to be done and they had to ramp up public knowledge of this and do a public information campaign. And the main campaign ran over the whole of the hottest summer that there'd been for years in 1976. And what was described as rabies fever kind of took off because everywhere you looked, there were posters. I remember the foyer of Long Eaton Library. On one wall, you had the rabies poster, which had a little girl cowering away from a frothing Alsatian or some such dog. And it was really scary. And then on the other wall was a giant poster of a Colorado beetle, because there was a Colorado beetle epidemic and they'd destroyed potato crops, and there'd just been the first outbreak for years in Britain. But it was this giant, terrifying looking beetle. So it was like walking at the foyer of fear, going to the library. I dared look from side to side. It was absolutely terrifying.
I remember the poster as a large skull. And it said something like rabies kills or something.
Yeah, it was classic public information film territory of the year, and no punches pulled.
The outcome of a sentimental impulse could mean a sentence of death for the animal you love and couldn't leave behind, and for you or someone like you, death in a manner that is beyond description. Whichever way you look at it, rabies means death.
It was not uncommon in those days to see stray dogs wandering around. It was
definitely.
like you never see them now, but then you just see random
Yeah.
dogs. So much you'd walk out of the library with the rabies poster, and then you'd see Fido strolling across the way. And I quite like dogs, but it was unnerving.
Rabies mania sort of reached a peak in the 1977. We've got 2 TV programs dealing with it within the same week.
Yeah, I mean, that was Rabies Week. What a great week for rabies it was. It was fantastic. The big fever pitch of summer going into autumn in 1976. Program makers clearly thinking, ooh, well, this is a zeitgeist, isn't it? And by spring, when these came out, it was Survivors, a famous episode called Mad Dog from the 3rd series of Survivors.
Great episode.
That was the beginning of April 77. And then there was an episode of Z-Cars called Rage, less well known probably, which was less than a week later.
And this episode of Survivors features Dennis Lill, doesn't it?
It's the great, and I worship at the feet of Lill, Dennis Lill. Yes, I love Dennis Lill.
And he's hunting for Greg, isn't he, I believe?
Yeah, it's that weird kind of slipshod series, which actually doesn't hold up at all. It actually makes little sense, and it's like it's been script edited by a deluded baboon or something. It's kind of got no common sense at all.
This is definitely one of the better episodes.
It absolutely is. He's searching for Greg, and that's the theme of that series. He's searching for the leader of the survivors, Greg, and he bumps into Maurice Perry, isn't it?
Yeah.
The actor who's in Doctor Who Colony in
Yes.
Space. He's playing a sort of philosopher.
Who's an expert on rabies.
Who's an expert on rabies. Yes, that's right. So Charles gets attacked by a pack of wild dogs. Quite scary, actually. The whole thing is pretty
Yes,
scary.
brilliantly done.
And he gets bitten, and he gets saved basically by the Maurice Perry character. He's a very sort of nihilistic character. There's quite a lot of them, unsurprisingly, in Survivors. But it adds to his, no doubt, feeling of nihilism that he contracts rabies.
Coincidentally, that night, after talking about rabies for half an hour, he goes to bed and catches rabies.
He tells Charles at the beginning that a dog snatched a piece of meat out of his mouth.
Yeah.
That's the other scary thing that used to terrify me about rabies. The higher up your body you get bitten, the quicker you get it, because it gets to the brain. It works its way up into the brain. Charles then, because he lacks the will to actually shoot the Maurice Perry character, so he goes to find anyone who might know him. And bizarrely, one of the people he goes and finds is Bernard Kay, the actor Bernard Kay. Great actor, always a great actor, who's also in Colony in Space, the Doctor Who story.
It's like Bernard Kay's in his own series of Survivors, isn't he?
I love it when you get things like that in these programs. Like, it's one of those things that you could almost like follow those characters and ignore the rest. And they're very strongly depicted, those two characters.
And to them, Dennis Lill's just some guy who's just wandered into their story.
Exactly. To their eyes, he lacks the guts to actually kill the Maurice Perry character. They do that. And then, of course, they're going to immediately kill Charles because they know he's been bitten. And for them, he's just a threat. I remember seeing this as a kid when it went out, and I just thought it was one of the greatest things I'd ever seen. I mean, it's so bizarre. He ends up kind of like taking shelter on a train. And also, the great thing about the Survivors episode is that, it's no coincidence I did an episode about rabies, but of course, it's perfectly reasonable that rabies would be a thing in the kind of post-pandemic world that they're in. But also, it's got no hint of public information film type stuff in it. It's not warning the public this could happen to you. It's just its own thing in the dystopian future. And it works really well.
That was a terrific shot. You saved my life.
Pure luck.
Oh.
True. I'm a bad shot. Pure luck. Rather I took a chance and hit you rather than let you catch rabies. Of course you wouldn't know. There's quite a bit in this area. Animals probably escaped from quarantine in Manchester and Liverpool. You won't see anything. The dog wasn't frothing. You've not come across rabies?
No.
The Z-Cars one is interesting because basically they find a drunk and he goes into a pub and then he basically wrecks the joint.
They give him some liquid to drink and he freaks out.
He freaks out the liquid. So inveterate rabies spotters like us know straight away what the problem is. But they, of course, and this is part of the whole point of making it a public information film type thing, is that they don't know the symptoms of rabies one little bit. So the police take him in and they give him a cup of tea in the interrogation room, and again, predictably, he goes mad.
The only reason they know it's rabies is because one of the doctors is from India, I believe. So they have that knowledge.
Yeah, and that's actually replicated in Mad Death as
It
well.
is, yeah.
Yeah, this is exactly the same thing. But then the rest of the episode is basically given over to identifying why it's there and tracing it. And then they find out it's some couple who've smuggled in a dog. And it couldn't be more public information film at the end, because Burt Lynch, Inspector Lynch, gives them a lecture that's almost straight out of a Rabies public information film booklet.
It is. It really is.
And then it ends, as if that wasn't on the nose enough. It cuts away from Lynch to the police station, and there's one of the Rabies posters on the notice board, which the credits roll over. So I don't know if there was any kind of, government input into it, but, there's no way that the government would have a problem with it, because it was certainly raising the issue in a still very popular program.
It didn't mean any harm. I mean, it's not like being a criminal, is it?
No, Mr. Wilson, it's not. All you did was make a great deal of trouble for us and a good many other people. Caused Constable Quilly here and 2 or 3 others to have painful injections that put one of them in hospital. Put the entire animal population at risk. Caused the death of 2 dogs, a farmer's prize cows, and a worthless small-time burglar. No, Mr. Wilson, that's not like being a criminal.
So not only have you got 2 TV programs going out in 1977 about rabies outbreaks in the UK, but you've also got 3 books released that same year. Day of the Mad Dogs by David Ann, Saliva by Walter Harris, and The Rage by Jack Ramsey. All released the same year, all about rabies outbreak in the UK. So everyone was thinking about rabies.
It was like, we are the children of rabies.
And then to top it all, in 1981, you get Stephen King's Cujo, which I remember vividly reading as a small child, probably younger than I should have been. Did you read it?
I don't think I've ever read Cujo, actually. I've seen it. I've seen the film version of it. It's a big, is it St. Bernard?
Yeah, it's big St. Bernard, yeah.
A big slobbery St. Bernard.
No humans actually catch the disease. It's just the sick animal sort of lays siege to a car, which sort of is echoed in The Mad Death, which we'll get to a little bit later.
Yeah, he savages a few people, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think he kills a policeman. A few people die, but they don't live long enough to contract the disease. So yeah, everyone was talking about rabies, and around this time, a guy called Nigel Slater, it's not the chef, is it?
As far as we know. No, it's not. It's not.
He writes a book about rabies in the UK, because everyone else is doing it, called The Mad Death, but no one was interested in publishing it.
No, that's right. And one of the things I should probably mention at this point is that we're very much indebted to someone called James Downes from Exeter University, who wrote an article called Mad Dogs and Englishmen, which is about the Mad Death, basically. And that's been incredibly useful for this.
Thank God for him, because the Wikipedia entry for The Mad Death is 1 sentence.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that puzzled me about the book was, and I had a strong suspicion, because I couldn't find any reference, because all of the newspaper coverage and lots of stuff subsequently has said it was based on the novel, which is true. But it sort of implies that the novel maybe came out around the same time as the other rash of rabies novels. But I couldn't find any reference to it in the bookseller or anything like that. The first reference to it is in 1983, and it's because apparently the adapter of The Mad Death, Sean Hignett, he found it as an unpublished typescript, and it had been rejected by lots of publishers, and it ended up somehow with him and BBC Scotland, and they liked it enough to decide to go for it. And it was actually only published to tie in with the TV series coming out. It wasn't a TV tie-in, it did exist beforehand, but it wasn't published beforehand.
And the novel's not set in Scotland either, is it?
Absolutely the opposite. It's down south.
I mean, the BBC had already said no to it, but BBC Scotland decided to take a punt on it.
Yeah, it's maybe worth just very briefly, and I'm sure we'll touch on this in future episodes with more detail about BBC Scotland, but there's a really interesting thing, and not much written about, and I confess I don't know much about all of the background to it, was that there was a really quite unusual tradition that started in the late 70s at BBC Scotland of doing an annual filmed series, all on film. The first one was called Running Blind, which was a adaptation of a Desmond Bagley novel. I think it predates Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy as an all-film drama. There were thrillers, and they followed it up with something called The Assassination Run, which has Mary Tam written by Jack Gerson, and a sequel called The Treachery Game as well. And it became almost like an annual thing that there'd be this big, quite glossy all-film thing came out of BBC Scotland. So it's definitely worth more investigation now. And I think basically BBC Scotland had that tradition. And so when they saw this option for this, that was obviously an all-film project. They thought, yes, we'll make it.
What do we know about Sean Hignett, who adapted the novel? He'd worked on quite a few TV programmes, including The Omega Factor, which was also Scottish, wasn't it?
Yes, that was another. That wasn't an all-film production, but that was a paranormal program and produced by George Galaccio. And he'd written a couple of episodes of that, and I think he worked for a theatre company in Scotland when The Mad Death came along.
He'd written for Crown Court, Emmerdale
Farm, please.
Sorry. IMDb just calls it Emmerdale. I'm really sorry. It's not my mistake.
Yeah.
John won't speak to me for 2 weeks now. Anyway, didn't Sean Hignett have a contact in the government that helped him when it came to adapting the novel?
Yeah, he knew a Scottish politician, and he got approval via that to talk to MAF, the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. And they sort of gave tacit support to it and saw the benefit of the public being warned through drama. So that sort of gave a lot of the detail, which I think is pretty similar to some of the stuff that was in the Waterhouse report as well, about what would happen and what the plans would be via MAF. So it was done very much sort of hand in glove with them, and again leans into this idea that it's actually got a really didactic purpose rather than a purely dramatic one.
To me, it comes across like a horror film, and I guess the director they chose makes sense, Robert Young, because he had a background in, well, his first film was Vampire Circus. Well, I suppose
Yes.
vampires and rabies, it's similar, people getting bitten and infected. But he had a horror background. I think he'd also directed an episode of Hammer House of Horror. So I guess he makes sense. I mean, he goes on to much better things, GBH being the most important program he did.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. The actual series is sort of split between largely the first episode, which is not entirely the first episode, but most of the first episode is really sort of, the horror side of things. And it's probably the most interesting bit. And certainly it's the bit that most people remembered after they'd seen The Mad Death, and it's kind of like it echoed down the years. Whereas there's a kind of love triangle aspect to it, which runs through it, and the sort of like the procedural element of it, of how you tackle it, which is much more kind of meat and potatoes, not terribly interesting.
It also clearly falls into that genre that was prevalent around that time of nature gone mad, Jaws,
Yeah.
The Swarm, grizzly bears, killer whales, rats, James Herbert, the rats. There was a whole genre of, and I suppose, making a poodle something that could kill you is the logical next step. We'll talk about the poodle later. Now, who stars in this thing? We've got Richard Heffer. Now, where would we know Richard Heffer from?
Richard Heffer was a very regular sort of main character in Cold It, the drama from the early 70s. He was in Dixon and Dock Green for a while, but probably around this time he would have best been known for a fairly short but memorable turn in the first series of Survivors, where he played Jimmy Garland in an episode called Garland's War.
Yeah.
I remember my brother was obsessed with Jimmy Garland. It was strange. And actually, if you watch that episode, he's the aristocrat who's been turfed out of his mansion by trade unionists. It's a strange kind of figure of identification to have, in a way. Maybe that says more about Terry Nation than anything else. But he came back into it in the last episode as well. And of course, Survivors went through a terrible argument behind the scenes, and lots of stuff got ditched after the first series.
We'll
including
save that for our episode.
Yeah. Absolutely, but he was quite a memorable turn in that, and he carried on working over the years as well. So at this point, he was a very well-known face.
And in this, he plays the vet who's in charge of dealing with the whole situation. He's a maverick vet. He's a vet on the edge.
Yeah,
It's terrible. He's really arrogant, petulant. I hated him.
yeah, I hated him from the moment he walked in. He's absolutely awful. And he, right from the beginning, he's whining because he wants to go to his job in Europe, doesn't he? It's like, I'm not going to save the country from rabies.
Yeah, he's so punchable.
He is deeply punchable.
Yeah.
Eminently punchable.
I was pulling for the dogs, I really was.
Well, there were quite a few people. We'll get onto that, won't we?
And they make out that, he's an expert in his field, so to speak. And it seems to me that if there's a rabies outbreak, anybody could run it. You just kill everything. 4 legs, kill it.
There will be strict controls on the movement of all animals in the area. And paper B, what is that? Plus the arrangements for the rounding up of strays. And I believe the police have already started on that operation.
Although the order doesn't come into effect until noon, I thought we'd be justified in jumping the gun slightly.
I hope that is the last time a gun will be jumped. Or someone might get in my line of fire.
You've also got Barbara Kellerman now. She was in loads of stuff, wasn't she?
She was in a lot of kind of, I suppose you could call them cult programs, as well as some big mainstream stuff as well. I have to confess at this point that when I was a kid, I was in love with Barbara Kellerman, I have to say. Because when I was really young and she was in stuff, it was like that kind of thing. I used to think that if you stared at women who were that beautiful, you'd be kind of like enslaved by them forever. So I used to basically look away from the screen when she was on. She was so
Wow.
it was. She had a profound effect on me. She was in a brilliant episode of Space 1999, probably the best, Dragon's Domain,
Oh, God, yes.
which is horrifying and
yeah,
great.
Yeah.
She was in the first series of the odd dystopian series with Edward Woodward called 1990, which was done by Wilfred Greatorex, which was once described as a Daily Mail reader's rape fantasy. Because it's basically a futuristic England where everybody's been taken over by the trade unions again, just to come back to the zeitgeist. And she was also in the John Mills Quatermass. She had quite a big role in that. And later, it wasn't around for a while, but then she was the Ice Queen in Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe, which is probably what she was most famous for.
And in this, she plays the doctor who works with the vet very closely.
Yes.
Too closely.
Yeah, too closely. And I suppose one of the things I thought was quite interesting about that was it was just, she's basically in a relationship with an awful aristocratic landowner. She's with him, but then there's an implication that she used to know the vet on the edge before. But she very quickly, just as a matter of factly, is shagging him again.
Yeah, she's a terrible character.
Yeah, she's just kind of drippy and delivers like, bless Barbara Kellerman. I mean, she's like
Doe-eyed.
It's doe-eyed, but she also just occasionally says things like, episode 1 ends with a line like, "It's happening," or "It's started," in this really sort of terrible way, and it doesn't kind of put any oomph into any of it.
A 12-year-old girl has rabies. It started.
I suppose the most famous person would be Ed Bishop from UFO.
Yes. Now, Ed was, for our generation, I think, he was one of that triumvirate of actors who played every American character in every UK drama series. But he was the only one who was actually American. The other two were Bruce Bower and Shane Rimmer, who were both Canadians. I think there was another one who used to pop up occasionally, I forgot. But Ed Bishop was great, carried a show like UFO. And just appeared and was always kind of like good value in everything he was in.
And he plays an American businessman, and we'll get on to him because he's pivotal. The whole first episode is basically all Ed Bishop.
Yeah.
100% Ed Bishop. In fact, should we go through the plot? What actually happens?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it all begins with a French woman called Bibi.
Yes.
Who drugs her Siamese cat and takes her on his hand luggage to, I believe it's Edinburgh, maybe?
Yeah. That was one of the criticisms that I thought was quite interesting about, somebody said afterwards, has Scotland always been so blandly unidentifiable? Because it's really dislocated of exactly where anything is supposed to be, isn't it?
Yeah, in fact, the only thing that sort of keys you in that it is set in Scotland is the opening music, which we should mention. The opening music is all things bright and beautiful. I wouldn't even say it's sung, it's sort of whispered eerily by a small Scottish child. Yes. And it's terrifying.
It is. It's one of the things that people remember about the programme. People remembered this down the years, and it's nearly all about the credits, and it's nearly all about Ed Bishop's character, basically.
All things wise and wonderful, the Lord God made them all.
So she brings in the Siamese cat. Now, before she left with the Siamese cat, it was attacked by a fox.
They take it to a really sort of odd Ferrero Rocher type ambassador's party type thing. The cat goes and scratches a dog that's in there, which becomes significant later. And then the cat gets away. And then one of the other people coming to the party knocks the cat over. And then a fox feeds on the cat's carcass. And that's how it all starts, basically.
It started.
Yeah. Basically, Ed Bishop's driving home from some business meeting or whatever, and he sees a fox on the side of the country road, and the fox is very docile. So,
Yes.
like any normal person, he gets out, picks up the fox, and then takes it home.
It's completely inexplicable, isn't it? Ed's character is shagging his secretary.
He's having two affairs, isn't
He's
he?
having two affairs. He's shagging his secretary. He's got another kind of quite glamorous mistress, and he looks quite deceived, doesn't he? And so, yeah, and then in the middle of all this hectic juggling his love life, he takes time to stop and pick up a stinking fox. When I was younger and I saw this, I actually quite liked all the bits with Ed Bishop. But when you see it now, it's just so utterly ridiculous and so telegraphed. Like, he gets in, sees his wife and starts preparing a gin and tonic. And of course, cuts his finger when he's slicing the lemon. And then he goes and shows his wife the stinking fox he's got in the barn, which is foaming at the mouth, but docile. And he bends down with his hand with the cut in it and starts rubbing it around in the foam. It's just so completely peculiar and ill-advised. I should say, I didn't mention about rabies. Rabies, you go through phases of animals in particular. You can get them where they're just totally docile with rabies, but you also get them where they alternate between docility and the rage, la rage.
See?
Fox? Oh, what?
He was just lying there by the side of the road. He's really very tame. Watch. Here, boy. Here, boy. Here, boy. Here, boy. That's a nice boy. Yes. Easy. Easy. Here's a nice boy. There's a nice... See what I mean?
It smells awful.
Well, they're supposed to smell that way.
So he goes to bed, gets up the next morning, and he's full of the joys of spring. And he's going to go out and feed his new fox. By the way, brilliant performance by Basil, playing
It is.
against type. Yeah.
Very against type, isn't it? He doesn't say it's Dirty Gertie from number 30 once.
So Ed Bishop opens the garage door to feed his new friendly fox. And the fox isn't happy.
He steals his broom at one
That's
point.
right. He starts poking the broom inside the garage and the broom just disappears. It's like something from some bad sketch comedy. Yeah, it's great. So then we go from Ed Bishop loving this fox to desperately trying to run him over in his car while his wife stands by the window watching this unfurl.
She's got the popcorn out.
It is genuinely terrifying, the bit where Basil throws himself against the window, foaming at the mouth.
It is, yeah. Boom, boom.
And that's the bit everyone remembers, isn't it?
I think the bit that everybody remembers is the Basil attack, definitely.
Yeah.
But then it sort of escalates even more, doesn't it? Because Ed goes to see his glamorous mistress. He's feeling a bit peaky, as you would. He's feeling increasingly peaky and his hands throbbing. You know, he doesn't seem to think, maybe that's where I stroked that slavering fox. Maybe it's connected in some way. But
He never mentions it, does he?
no, and of course, he doesn't only mentions it, he bites his mistress's lip with obvious consequences later.
Oh,
When he
God.
leaves the...
What a
when
way
he-
to go.
I know, nibbled on the lip by Ed Bishop, by a rabid Ed Bishop.
There should have been public information films about that.
If Ed Bishop comes towards you, do not kiss him. Call the police. Stay in your house. So Ed is even more peaky. Drives off and has a car crash.
Crashes into a combine harvester.
He do, yeah. But it is teetering on this kind of slapstick of terrible things happening to him from one step to another. And he gets taken into hospital where they think he's just got shock. And then they think he's got a virus, which is true.
Never mentions the fox.
No, by this point, he's starting to do that whenever water.
Yeah.
And he starts having quite terrifying hallucinations
Hmm.
about water, but also while he's trying to eat a piece of cucumber. And he's got a slice of cucumber hanging off his lip. It's like, you could edit it into an Ed Bishop public information film, couldn't you,
Oh,
actually?
Jesus.
I think we'll let you stay here for a couple of days till this gets better. You may have picked up an infection somewhere along the way, or perhaps you really are getting the flu.
Then, as in the Z cars, In this time, it's a nurse, I think, who's from, is it Africa? And she's seen rabies before. So then they all realise and put Ed in an isolation booth, and he hallucinates. There's some random nudity thrown in for his hallucinations.
Because apparently you have erotic dreams when you're dying of rabies.
That seems to be the only upside.
It's like the Singing Detective.
Yeah, exactly. You will have 5 minutes of erotic dreams, and the rest of it you'll be in agony.
Wow.
So,
and he dies horribly, doesn't he?
He dies in a miserable way, and then really you move on from that. Apart from a bit later when the mistress does indeed contract rabies, and they manage to piece together the fact that Ed was involved, because basically then it goes over to the gruesome twosome of the Barbara Kellerman characters and Richard Heffer. And then it becomes very much the government are involved. Jimmy Logan, that kind of renowned Scottish comedian and actor, plays a minister. The rest of it is dealing with the rabies. And then because they need another episode out of it, you have the locals start to turn on the government people and the vet. There's a scene in a pub where the sanctimonious Richard Heffer character goes and insists that they get rid of their ferrets or polecats or whatever they are. And then some brutal blokes basically silently threaten him.
They hold him down while a woman waves a ferret in his face.
I think he deserves it.
But that scene, I really hated it because none of the characters say a word. And you might think, oh, that's because it's quite creepy. But to me, it just stinks of they couldn't afford anyone with an equity card.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
It's just so unnatural.
Yeah, it is. And then there's a character played by Brenda Bruce in it, who's the animal woman who is horrified by all that's happening. So the episode 2 ends with basically it's obviously her lets all the dogs that have been put in a pound. At this point, they're not going to kill them, or not necessarily, and they put them all in a pound, and she lets them all out. So you don't have to ask who let the dogs out.
Somebody got in during the night, let the dogs loose.
But all of them?
Except one. Too far gone to run off, apparently. It was rabid.
Many dogs were in there?
63. All probably infected, all running wild. God knows where.
The third episode is basically 45 minutes of Richard Heffer sitting in a helicopter shooting at dogs.
Some of the dogs don't really look very terrifying, do they?
There's a bit where a soldier's lying on the ground and a golden Labrador comes running up to him and he's just about to start licking on the face. And he starts screaming to try and sell the idea this dog's going to ravage him. He's clearly going to lick him.
Just worth mentioning at this point, for a long while, and I was under this impression as well, people thought that for some reason that filming took place in 1981 and this was held over for a couple of years, but actually for 2 reasons. There's a Stage article I read recently that confirms that it was filmed in 82. In fact, there's a couple of articles that confirm it was a year before that they shot it, before it's transmitted. And also there was someone on one forum whose dog was actually involved in the filming back in 1982. For a long while, there was an idea that it was controversial and held back for a year, but that's not true.
The only really disturbing bit for me in that third episode is where the owner of a dog is forced to shoot it in the head.
Yes.
It's this really cute collie.
Yeah.
And it's sitting by his side, looking up at him, and oh, that's really horrible. I don't even like thinking about it.
No, that is horrible. And there's a strange bit where there's this awful blokes fighting over Barbara Kellerman, and one of the power plays in it is that Heffer insists on the other character's horse being shot before they know for definite that it's got rabies, but it's all a power play between the two awful blokes.
And then the whole thing ends in a really weird way. That woman who lets the dogs out, Barbara Kellerman's character turns up to vaccinate her against rabies, and she refuses to be vaccinated. Now, back in the day, that must have seemed quite weird, but now it's just like, oh, she's one of those people. But back then, they had to make her completely fucking mad. And she's so mad, she traps Barbara Kellerman in a room full of cats and then starts treating her like a cat.
Yes, it's strange. She starts talking to Barbara Kellerman like she's a cat, and some of the cats in this cellar are rabid as well.
I watched that final episode on my own in a house surrounded by 8 cats. Now, watching the last episode of The Mad Death surrounded by 8 cats is a bit like watching Jaws in a rowing boat in the middle of the ocean. But I still found it ludicrous. The ending is just so melodramatic, and it just turns into like a cheap horror film.
Stand aside, Miss Duncroft.
No!
I must be able to see the dog.
Why are you shooting all my boys?
Stand aside, please.
For God's sake, shoot! Stand aside from the door.
Seize him, Toby. No. No, you're not the danger.
Please,
move away from the door.
Shoot! For God's sake, shoot! Look out!
One thing we have missed talking about, I guess, which you just mentioned it briefly, which was the shopping centre scene. I think it's in the second episode. It's moderately effective where a rabid dog gets into the shopping centre. Didn't somebody online say it was East Kilbride or something like that?
Yeah, I think it is.
A family end up in the car park. They didn't realise they were supposed to get out and they get trapped with the dog and they have to lock themselves in the car. That's quite effective.
Yeah, but the dog hits the car with such force that the kid falls out the other door. It doesn't make any fucking sense.
It's Robo-Dog.
And it also doesn't make any sense because all of this seems to be taking place in the countryside, and then all of a sudden we're in the middle of what must be a city.
Yeah. It's just got no sense of place whatsoever. It's actually...
It could be anywhere.
It could be literally anywhere. But then I suppose that's interesting because some of those other film series I was talking about aren't set in Scotland, though they're made by BBC Scotland. But then, yeah, so it ends with a shocking twist that some kids are looking at a dog in a car, and it's the collie dog.
Yeah.
From episode 1 that got scratched by the rabid cat, and he's looking a bit unhappy with things. And then he goes all slow-mo.
Heifer does a double take, which they re-edit over and over again, just to try and remind you of this dog that you've seen once.
So over the top, they might as well have put a Swanee whistle on the soundtrack to draw your attention to it.
My favourite bit is just before that, where Bibi, the French woman, is leaving, and she's oblivious to everything that's happened.
Yes.
She complains about her cat going missing, but apart from that, I had a wonderful time.
Yes, exactly. I think that's interesting because one of the other things was that the French found the English response to rabies slightly balmy, I think, because of the fact that from their point of view in Europe, because rabies did exist there, everybody was very clued up on what to do if you got bitten by anything that might conceivably be rabid. And there'd hardly been any cases of rabies in humans. Very small number, and most people knew about getting the immunizations and stuff like that. So I think that's interesting because, again, because the French people in it swam through the whole thing, even though they brought the cause in, and then swam back again unharmed.
And I kind of understand that perspective because watching this now, having lived through something that's much worse than rabies, where millions of people died, rabies looks very small fries in comparison.
It's one of those things that gets you on a personal level, isn't it? It's basically that if you develop symptoms, you've had it. You're like someone in a horror film that's been bitten by one of the aliens that infects you, and you're the guy in the crowd who doesn't want to admit that they've got it because you know you're doomed and you've had it. And that's why it's horrible, rabies. One of the things that happened after the series came out was that the BVA, the British Veterinary Association, they actually spoke out against the program.
Oh, really?
They thought it was scaremongering. There'd been, very few instances of rabies in Europe in human beings, and that they thought it was massively over-egging it. So there was by no means were all the sort of establishment to do with things like animals and to do with other things as one on this.
I think one thing that the program does get right is the way that people react or underreact.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for something similar to Threads, where you've got like a documentary feel to like a serious subject, it's not like that at all. It's the love triangle, the stupid cat lady escapades. It's more of a horror film, I think, than anything.
Yeah. I think the reputation it has, and funnily enough, you mentioned in Threads, some people had the most exaggerated view of this program. I've seen people talk about it's like the bleakest program there's ever been on, and it is absolutely not at all. I think it's all about the kind of like the Ed Bishop stuff, the hallucinations he has, the horror of him dying. But of course, now you can just look at loads of that, and it's actually you can just as easily be roaring with laughter all the way through that sequence. I mean, it's got effective shocks, and I love Ed Bishop. So, it must have been great for him. You've got this role, you're in episode 1. You're literally, one of the few people who die. Certainly threw himself into it, even if his character was ridiculous.
Yeah, and it went down really well as well, didn't it?
It did largely, yeah. It's audiences.
With the viewers, anyway.
Yeah, the audiences were fine. It was like sort of, it would have, it was in those weird days where the BBC refused to let there to be a joint over all channels chart. So it was in the top 10 of the BBC, but that would probably be lower reaches of the top 20.
I think it was top 3 on the final episode of the
in the BBC.
Yeah.
So I mean, it did fine. It got good buzz. Most of the reviews were like, "Oh, this is chilling." The criticism was from some people, as I said earlier, that found it a bit bizarre how it was set in Scotland, and yet Scotland seemed to be this weirdly bland, kind of not memorable place at all. Whereas you make a program in Scotland, it just seems perverse, especially when you've relocated it from the novel from the south to Scotland. And then apart from Jimmy Logan wandering around wearing tartan with a shotgun, yeah, it's odd in that respect.
A few of the critics pointed out that Basil Brush wasn't great either. They thought his performance was a little wooden.
Yeah.
Some idiot said that they thought they used the puppet to bang against Ed Bishop's door.
Oh, they don't understand.
Crazy.
Do they? That's the fate of Basil. You know, a great performance like that, and they think it's a puppet.
So what happened to Sean Hignett after this?
He took the high road, quite literally. He didn't exactly flourish. He wrote just a handful of episodes of Take the High Road, and then I think he moved on to other things. He didn't really develop much of a career after that. As I say, though, he did work in the theatre, kind of theatre management kind of thing, so I think he carried on with that.
Yeah, and like I say, Robert Young went on to GBH, a programme that's on our short list of things to do, so we won't dwell on him. So before we go, John, would you recommend it?
No.
I think the first episode's worth a visit.
It is, yeah.
Just for Ed.
It's just the second and third episodes are such a grind. They really are. They're just sort of kind of shoddy. They're just badly sort of made, and then just
the dogs are so clearly tame, and no matter what you do with the editing, you're never going to get around that fact.
The dogs that are at the beginning of the Survivors episode, Mad Dog that attacked
they're
Charles,
much
are
better.
about 10 times better than the ones in it. They're convincing, but the ones in the Mad Death are not. Yeah, first episode because of Ed, and Ed staring and going "Ugh," with a bit of cucumber on his lip. It's definitely worth it for that.
Okay, so that's the Mad Death off our list. What are we doing next, John?
I believe we're going to cover the strange world of Gurney Slade, Anthony Newley's Meisterwork.
So anyway, don't catch rabies. Until next time, I've been Neil.
And I've been John.
And you've been listening to The World of Telly.